The taste of betrayal is something you never forget. Standing there in that funeral home, wearing the black dress my grandfather had once complimented, I watched my Uncle Richard smirk as he told everyone how I'd abandoned the family legacy and failed spectacularly on my own. My hands trembled as I clutched my small leather portfolio, the one containing proof of everything I'd sacrificed over the past 3 years. Proof no one would see until the reading of the will. I caught Uncle Richard's eye across the room, and his smug expression only deepened. He had no idea what was coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The call came at 3:27 a.m. I remember checking my phone, bleary-eyed, the harsh light illuminating my small apartment bedroom. It was Maria, my grandfather's assistant of 30 years. "Alexandra, it's your grandfather. You need to come now." I didn't need to ask what she meant. At 92, Grandpa William had been declining for months. The doctors had warned us the last time I visited, secretly of course. If Uncle Richard had known I was still in contact with Grandpa, he would have found a way to stop it. I threw clothes into a bag, splashed water on my face, and was in my car by 3:45. The drive from Portland to Hillside Manor normally took 40 minutes, but at that hour, with empty roads and fear pushing down on the accelerator, I made it in, 28. Maria was waiting for me at the door, her usually perfect appearance disheveled, eyes red from crying. "He's asking for you," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Richard left an hour ago to get some rest. He doesn't know I called you." I followed her up the grand staircase of the home where I'd spent so many happy childhood summers. The Davis family estate had been built by my great-grandfather when Davis furniture manufacturing first became successful in the 1950s. The banisters my small hands once slid down were crafted from the same Oregon white oak that had made our furniture famous. Grandpa William's room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting long shadows across the antique furnishings. The medical equipment surrounding his bed looked jarringly out of place among the handcrafted pieces that had stood in this room for generations. He looked so small beneath the covers, nothing like the towering figure who had taught me to sand wood grain when I was just 6 years old. His eyes were closed when I entered, but they fluttered open as I approached. "Alexandra?" he whispered, a smile transforming his gaunt face. "My brave girl." I took his hand, alarmed by how cold it felt. "I'm here, Grandpa." "Not much time," he said, his voice surprisingly clear despite his condition. "The safe, behind the portrait in my study. The combination is your birthday." I squeezed his hand. "Don't worry about that now." "No." His fingers tightened around mine with unexpected strength. "Tonight, before Richard returns, everything you need is there." He took a labored breath. "They think I don't know what's happening to the company, that I'm too old, too sick to understand." A coughing fit overtook him then, and Maria stepped forward to help him sip water through a straw. "Richard has been telling everyone the company is failing because of your departure," Maria murmured, after he settled. "That your new eco-friendly approach abandoned the traditions that made Davis what it is." Grandpa's eyes found mine again. "You didn't fail, Alexandra. You were the only one brave enough to see the truth." 3 years ago, I'd left Davis Furniture, the company where I'd worked since college graduation, after Uncle Richard rejected my proposal to modernize our manufacturing and design approach. As the oldest grandchild and a Davis by blood, everyone expected me to eventually take over. But Richard, my mother's brother who had married into the Davis name, had other ideas. After my parents died in a boating accident when I was 22, Richard had positioned himself as Grandpa's right hand. When Grandpa's health began to decline, Richard's influence grew. My sustainable furniture design concepts were dismissed as trendy nonsense, my market research showing declining sales in traditional lines ignored. The final straw came when Richard promoted his daughter Olivia over me, despite her lack of experience or interest in the business. So I left and founded Evergreen Design, pouring my savings into a small workshop where I could create the sustainable, modern pieces I believed in. The first 2 years were brutal. Maxed out credit cards, sleepless nights, and the constant whispers from former family colleagues that I'd made a terrible mistake. "The company is in trouble, isn't it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Grandpa nodded weakly. "Worse than anyone knows, Richard has been hiding the numbers, taking loans, making promises we can't keep." His eyes grew intense. "But you've been watching out for us all along, haven't you?" I felt my throat tighten. How did he know? "I may be old, Alexandra, but I still have friends in this industry. I hear things." He smiled faintly. "The McCormick account? That was you, wasn't it?" 6 months ago, I'd learned through an industry contact that McCormick Hotels, one of Davis Furniture's largest clients for over 30 years, was planning to drop them in favor of a more sustainable manufacturer. Using connections from my new business, I'd arranged a meeting with their procurement director and proposed a compromise. A new line that Davis could produce that would meet their sustainability requirements. I'd designed the entire collection over a weekend, then anonymously submitted it through a mutual contact. The McCormick contract had been renewed, saving Davis Furniture from immediate disaster. Richard had taken full credit, of course. "You should have let them fail," Maria said bitterly. "No," I shook my head. "Too many people would lose their jobs, people who've been loyal to our family for generations." Grandpa's eyes shone with pride. "That's why it has to be you, Alexandra. The safe. Tonight." He fell asleep shortly after, his breathing shallow but steady. Maria and I sat with him until dawn, speaking in hushed tones about the company's decline. As the director of administration, she had seen the warning signs long before anyone else. Richard had been cooking the books, taking out secret loans against company assets, even selling off valuable inventory at reduced prices to show artificial revenue. "The banks are circling," she confided. "We have maybe 3 months before they call in the loans." When the morning light began filtering through the curtains, Maria stood. "Richard will be back soon. You should go to the study." The portrait of my great-grandfather hung above the fireplace in Grandpa's wood-paneled study. I carefully lifted it from the wall, revealing the safe I'd known about since childhood, but had never been permitted to open. My birthday, 08-14-86, clicked into place, and the heavy door swung open. Inside was a single expandable file folder, labeled simply Alexandra. My hands trembled as I opened it. The contents took my breath away. Ownership transfers for patents I'd created while working at Davis, now legally assigned to me. Documentation of a secret trust in my name containing 40% of the company shares. Detailed records of the financial mismanagement Richard had been hiding, including forged signatures on loan documents. And most shockingly, proof that Evergreen Design had been quietly funded by my grandfather through a series of anonymous investors. The business I thought I'd built entirely on my own had been supported by him all along, not with handouts, but with legitimate investments that had allowed me to earn my success on merit while keeping me connected to the family legacy. There was also a letter, sealed in an envelope with "to be read at the appropriate time," written in my grandfather's elegant script. Clipped to it was a note that simply said, "Trust Thomas Wright. He knows what to do." Thomas Wright had been the Davis family attorney for decades. I'd always liked him, but assumed he was firmly in Richard's corner like everyone else. Footsteps in the hallway sent me scrambling to replace the portrait after securing the folder in my bag. I slipped out through the connecting door to the library just as I heard Richard's voice in the study. "The old man still breathing?" he asked someone, his tone disturbingly casual. I froze, pressing against the bookshelf. "Yes, sir," came the reply. James Peterson, Richard's business partner. but the nurse doesn't think it will be much longer. Good. We need to move quickly once he's gone. The bankers are getting nervous, and if anyone looks too closely at the books before we secure that Chinese manufacturing deal, we're finished. What about Alexandra? If she shows up for the funeral? Richard's laugh cut through me like a blade. What can she do? She abandoned the company, remember? Besides, everyone knows her little sustainable furniture boutique is failing. She can barely pay rent on that workshop of hers. If only he knew. Evergreen Design had turned its first real profit 3 months ago. We'd just secured a contract with Westlake Development to furnish their new eco-friendly apartment complex. But I'd kept a low profile, letting Richard and the rest of Portland believe I was struggling. Still, James persisted, she's a Davis by blood. If she contests anything, she won't, Richard said confidently. The will leaves everything to family members actively involved in the business. I made sure of that when we had him update it last year. My blood ran cold. Had they coerced Grandpa into changing his will? But then why would he direct me to the safe? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I managed to slip out of the house unseen, my mind racing. Back in my apartment, I spread the documents across my dining table, trying to make sense of it all. According to the paperwork, I owned 40% of Davis Furniture Manufacturing. Richard owned 35%, with the remaining 25% distributed among minor shareholders, including long-term employees. I was the largest shareholder of a company that everyone thought I had abandoned. My phone rang. Maria. "He's gone," she said, her voice breaking. 20 minutes ago. Peaceful, in his sleep. I sank into a chair, tears flowing freely. Despite knowing this call was coming, the finality of it crushed me. "Richard is already calling the funeral home," she continued, "and he summoned the executive team for an emergency meeting tomorrow. To announce the Chinese manufacturing deal?" I guessed. "Yes. How did you—" "Never mind. It's a disaster, Alexandra. They're planning to close the Portland factory, lay off most of the workforce, and move production overseas. The Davis name will just be a brand slapped on cheap imports. Everything my great-grandfather, grandfather, and parents had built, reduced to a label. The craftspeople who had dedicated their lives to our company, discarded." "When is the funeral?" I asked, my grief hardening into resolve. "Thursday. Richard wants it done quickly." "And the will reading?" "Friday morning at the estate. Thomas Wright is handling it personally." I thought of the note clipped to my grandfather's letter. "Trust Thomas Wright. He knows what to do." "Thank you, Maria, for everything." "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked at the documents spread before me, evidence of both betrayal and unexpected support. "Exactly what my grandfather prepared me to do," I replied. The next 3 days passed in a blur of grief and preparation. I contacted Thomas Wright, who agreed to meet me discreetly at his office after hours. When I showed him the contents of the folder, he nodded solemnly. "William and I prepared for this eventuality," he confirmed. He knew Richard was driving the company to ruin, but needed irrefutable proof before he could act. "The documentation you've gathered completes what we need. So the will Richard thinks exists is not the final version," Thomas finished with a small smile. "William executed a new will just 6 weeks ago, when he was still legally competent. I witnessed it myself, along with 2 physicians who certified his mental capacity." Relief flooded through me. "What about the letter?" I asked, showing him the sealed envelope. "That's for the reading," Thomas said. "William was very specific about when it should be revealed." The day of the funeral arrived with appropriately somber skies. Cedar Grove Funeral Home was filled, with Portland's business elite, loyal employees, and family friends. I arrived early, keeping to myself in a back corner as the room filled. Many people did double takes when they saw me, then quickly averted their eyes. 3 years of Richard's narrative had done its work. I was the ungrateful granddaughter who had abandoned the family legacy. Olivia, Richard's daughter and my cousin, approached hesitantly. We had been close once, before Richard had used her as a pawn in his power play. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "He was my grandfather too." She glanced over her shoulder at her father, who was holding court near the casket, accepting condolences like a politician at a fundraiser. "Dad says the company is in trouble. Because of you," she said, though I detected uncertainty in her voice. "That your leaving damaged our reputation with clients. Is that what you believe?" She bit her lip. "I don't know what to believe anymore. The numbers don't add up, but Dad won't let me see the full financial reports, even though I'm supposedly director of operations now." I studied my cousin's face. Olivia had never wanted to work for the family business. Her passion was marine biology. Richard had forced her into the role to block my path. "Come by my workshop tomorrow after the will reading," I said quietly. "There are some things you should see." Olivia looked like she might say more, but Richard's voice boomed from the front of the room, calling everyone to take their seats for the service. The eulogy he delivered painted my grandfather as a traditionalist who valued loyalty above all else, a not-so-subtle dig at me. Then came the moment that would later give this story its title. My father-in-law faced many challenges in his final years, Richard said, his voice dripping with false solemnity. "None more painful than watching his own granddaughter abandon our family company to pursue her own interests, rejecting the very traditions that built our success." Heads turned in my direction. Richard's eyes found mine, a triumphant gleam in them. Despite Alexandra's decision to compete against her own family with her failed sustainable furniture venture, William never stopped hoping she would see the error of her ways and return to the fold. My hands clenched around the small leather portfolio in my lap. Inside was every document from the safe, organized and ready. Sadly, that reconciliation never happened. But I promise you, as the new head of Davis Furniture Manufacturing, I will honor William's legacy by ensuring our company remains true to the traditional craftsmanship that made the Davis name synonymous with quality. The service concluded, and the reception that followed was excruciating. People either avoided me entirely or approached with awkward condolences that couldn't quite hide their curiosity about the family drama. Through it all, I maintained my composure, letting Richard believe his narrative had prevailed. Little did he know that in less than 24 hours, everything would change. That night, back in my apartment, I finally allowed myself to fully grieve, not just for my grandfather, but for the years of estrangement his manipulation had cost us. Richard had systematically isolated Grandpa from me, controlling who had access to him, filtering information, and convincing him that my modern ideas would destroy his legacy. Or so I had thought. The contents of the safe told a different story. One, where my grandfather had secretly supported me all along, watching from a distance as I proved myself on my own terms. He had been playing a long game, one that Richard never suspected. As I prepared for bed, my phone pinged with a text from Maria. "Everything is ready for tomorrow. Richard has no idea." I slept fitfully, waking before dawn. Today would determine not just my future, but the future of Davis Furniture Manufacturing and everyone who depended on it. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit with a subtle green blouse, professional but with a hint of Evergreen Designs brand color. The leather portfolio went into my briefcase along with my grandfather's sealed letter. The reading of the will was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Hillside Manor. I arrived 20 minutes early to find Thomas Wright already there, arranging papers on the large dining room table. He gave me a reassuring nod. "Are you ready for this?" he asked quietly. "As ready as I'll ever be." Richard arrived with his entourage, James Peterson, 2 junior executives from the company, and Olivia, who looked uncomfortable with the whole proceeding. He barely acknowledged my presence, taking his seat at what would have been my grandfather's place at the head of the table. Maria was the last to arrive, slipping into the seat beside me with a supportive squeeze of my hand under the table. Thomas cleared his throat and began the formal proceedings. We are gathered here for the reading of the last will and testament of William Edward Davis, dated April 18th of this year. Richard interrupted immediately. There must be some mistake. My father-in-law's will was updated last November. Thomas fixed him with a steady gaze. I have here the most recent legally executed will, signed by William Davis when he was of sound mind, witnessed by myself and 2 physicians who have provided sworn statements as to his mental competence. At the time of signing, Richard's face flushed. That's impossible. I was with him constantly. He couldn't have... Shall I proceed? Thomas asked firmly. Richard fell silent, but I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. The first portions of the will were fairly standard. Personal items to various family members, donations to favorite charities, provisions for long-term staff. Richard grew increasingly impatient. Can we get to the company succession? He finally demanded. Thomas nodded. I was just coming to that. He adjusted his glasses. Regarding Davis Furniture Manufacturing, Mr. Davis has left control of the company to the majority shareholder. Richard smiled smugly. As expected. That would be Alexandra Davis, who currently holds 40% of company shares through the William E. Davis Trust, established secretly 3 years ago. The room went completely silent. Richard's face drained of color. That's not possible, he whispered. In addition, Thomas continued, William Davis has bequeathed his personal 10% stake in the company to Alexandra as well, giving her a controlling interest of 50%. Richard shot to his feet. This is fraud. She hasn't been involved with the E. Company for 3 years. She's been running a competing business. A business that William Davis himself financially supported through a series of anonymous investments, Thomas countered smoothly. All perfectly legal and documented. Olivia was staring at me with wide eyes. James Peterson looked like he might be sick. Maria was smiling. Furthermore, Thomas said, William Davis left a letter to be read at this time. He held out his hand, and I passed him the sealed envelope from my briefcase. Thomas broke the seal and unfolded the letter. To my family and colleagues, he read in a clear voice. If this letter is being read, then I have passed on, and the truth can finally be revealed. 3 years ago, I became aware that Davis Furniture Manufacturing was being mismanaged under Richard's leadership. Rather than confront this directly, in my weakened state, I devised a test. Richard sank back into his chair, his expression one of dawning horror. I allowed Alexandra to believe I had sided with Richard against her modernization plans. I wanted to see what she would do, whether she would fight for her vision within the company or have the courage to pursue it on her own. When she chose to leave and found Evergreen Design, I was both saddened and proud. Through trusted intermediaries, I provided seed funding for her venture, not as charity, but as a sound business investment that has since yielded significant returns. Thomas turned the page. Meanwhile, I watched as Richard continued to make disastrous decisions for Davis Furniture, hiding the true financial situation from me and the board. What he doesn't know is that I have been fully aware of every unauthorized loan, every manipulated financial statement, and every falsehood told to our loyal employees and customers. Richard's face had gone from pale to gray. This is slander, he muttered, but there was no conviction in his voice. Most notably, Thomas continued reading, when Alexandra anonymously saved the company by designing the McCormick Hotel collection that Richard took credit for, I knew without doubt who should lead Davis Furniture into the future. Gasps came from around the table. The McCormick contract had been celebrated as Richard's great triumph. the one bright spot in the company's recent history. Alexandra has demonstrated both the vision to see where our industry must go and the respect for our legacy needed to get us there. More importantly, even when she believed I had turned against her, she worked secretly to save the company that bears our name, protecting the livelihoods of those who depend on it. Thomas looked up from the letter, his eyes meeting mine briefly, before he continued. Richard, if you are hearing this, know that your deception has failed. A full forensic accounting of your activities has been underway for months. By the time this letter is read, Thomas Wright will have already delivered evidence of your financial misconduct to the board and the appropriate authorities. Richard clutched at his chest, his breathing becoming labored. James Peterson moved. To help him, looking panicked. To those loyal employees and family members who were kept in the dark, I offer my sincere apologies. Alexandra has my complete confidence and the full authority of my legacy to lead Davis Furniture Manufacturing into a new era that honors our traditions while embracing the future. Thomas folded the letter and placed it on the table. The letter is signed William Edward Davis and dated April 18th, the same day as the will. Richard had collapsed forward onto the table, his face ashen. "Call an ambulance!" James shouted, loosening Richard's tie. As the room erupted into chaos, my eyes met Olivia's across the table. In her expression, I saw relief rather than anger. She had been as much a prisoner of her father's ambitions as I had been. Maria leaned close to my ear. Your grandfather would be so proud right now. As we waited for the ambulance to arrive, I stood and walked to the windows overlooking the grounds of Hillside Manor, the family home, the company, the legacy. All of it now rested on my shoulders. Not because it had been handed to me, but because I had proven myself worthy of it, both by leaving and by never truly abandoning it. Richard would survive his cardiac episode, though his reputation and freedom would not fare as well once the financial investigations concluded. The company I had thought lost to me was now mine to save. An evergreen design, the business I had built with my own hands, and I now knew with my grandfather's silent support, would become the innovation division of a revitalized Davis Furniture Manufacturing. As paramedics wheeled Richard out, his eyes found mine one last time. In them, I saw not just defeat, but a glimmer of recognition. He had underestimated me all along, never suspecting that the granddaughter he had dismissed as naive and idealistic had been methodically outmaneuvering him with our grandfather's blessing. Thomas approached, tucking the will and supporting documents into his briefcase. The board meeting is scheduled for Monday morning. The forensic accountants will present their findings, and you'll be formally installed as CEO. And the Chinese manufacturing deal? Canceled as of this morning. I took the liberty of reaching out to McCormick Hotels. They're eager to meet with you about expanding your sustainable line to all their properties. I smiled, the first genuine smile since my grandfather's death. Thank you, Thomas, for everything. I was just doing my job, he replied. William knew exactly what he was doing. He tested you both, and only one of you passed. As people began to filter out of the room, still shocked by the morning's revelations, Olivia approached me hesitantly. I had no idea, she said, about any of it. Dad kept me in meetings where I had nothing to contribute, kept me away from the real financial information. Her voice trailed off. I know, I assured her. Grandpa knew too. What happens now? She asked. I considered my cousin, who had been as much a pawn as I had been. Well, for starters, you can go back to marine biology if that's what you want. Or, I added, seeing the hope in her eyes, you could help me establish the William Davis Foundation for Sustainable Manufacturing Practices. Grandpa left funds for it in the will. For the first time in years, Olivia and I embraced, the manufactured rivalry between us dissolving in the truth of what had happened. As I left Hillside Manor that day, portfolio in hand and the weight of a family legacy on my shoulders, I felt my grandfather's presence beside me, He had given me not just a company, but a chance to prove myself worthy of it. Richard had told everyone I'd failed in business at my grandfather's funeral. He never suspected that my supposed failure was actually the most successful test of character I could have passed. The emergency board meeting was called for Monday morning, just 3 days after the funeral. I spent the weekend in my small workshop at Evergreen Design, surrounded by the sustainable furniture pieces that had become my life's passion. The scent of freshly sanded reclaimed wood and natural finishes usually brought me comfort. But that weekend, it did little to calm my churning thoughts. My phone had been ringing constantly since the will reading. Reporters seeking comments on the Davis family drama, former colleagues suddenly remembering our friendship, and potential clients who had previously dismissed my eco-friendly nonsense, now eager to schedule meetings. I let most calls go to voicemail, focusing instead on preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most challenging meeting of my career. Maria came by on Sunday afternoon, bringing coffee and her encyclopedic knowledge of the company's current situation. "The factory floor is buzzing with rumors," she said, settling into one of my prototype chairs. A sleek design made from salvaged Oregon maple with cushions upholstered in fabric woven from recycled plastic bottles. Word of Richard's collapse at the will reading has spread, but no one knows exactly what happened. I ran my fingers along the grain of a table I'd been finishing. How bad is it really? The company's finances? Maria's expression darkened. Worse than I initially thought. After you showed me the documents from the safe, I did some digging. She pulled a flash drive from her purse. The Chinese manufacturing deal was just the tip of the iceberg. Richard took out 3 unauthorized loans in the past year alone, using company equipment as collateral. He sold the warehouse property on Riverside and leased it back at an inflated rate from a shell company that, surprise, surprise, he owns through his brother-in-law. The property my great-grandfather purchased in 1952, I felt sick. That warehouse had been part of Davis Furniture's history from almost the beginning. Yes, and there's more. The McCormick contract you saved? Richard has been cutting corners on production quality to maximize profit. The latest shipment had a 40% rejection rate for defects. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what I was inheriting. So, on top of everything else, we're at risk of losing our biggest client due to quality issues. And they're not the only ones complaining, Maria added grimly. Returns are up across the board. Richard replaced master craftspeople with undertrained workers to cut costs. He changed wood suppliers 3 times in the past year, each time going with cheaper materials. The Davis family name had stood for quality craftsmanship for 3 generations. In just a few years, Richard had undermined decades of reputation building. What about the employees? The ones who've been with us for years? Maria's expression softened slightly. Many have already left. Those who stayed have been working under impossible conditions: reduced hours, increased quotas, constant threats of outsourcing. She hesitated. There's something else you should know. The pension fund. My stomach dropped. What about it? Richard's been skimming from it. Not enough to trigger automatic audits, but substantial amounts over time. Some of the older craftspeople who retired recently have been getting reduced payments. They've been complaining, but Richard's financial team keeps blaming administrative errors that never seem to get corrected. I stood up abruptly, pacing the length of my small workshop. This was worse than I had imagined. Richard hadn't just been driving the company toward bankruptcy. He'd been systematically looting it while destroying everything that made Davis Furniture special. He never cared about the legacy, I said quietly. It was always just a cash cow. To him. Your grandfather realized that too late, Maria replied. By the time he understood the full extent of what Richard was doing, his health was already failing. That's why he put his plan in motion with you. I turned to face her. Why? Didn't he just fire Richard when he first suspected something was wrong? Richard was careful. He kept the books looking clean enough on the surface, and he had cultivated relationships with the board members, golf games, hunting trips, private school connections for their children. They trusted him implicitly. Maria sighed. Plus, your grandfather was old school. Family loyalty meant everything to him. It took overwhelming evidence to convince him that his son-in-law was deliberately sabotaging the company. I nodded, understanding. Grandpa William had always believed in giving people second chances, in seeing the best in them until proven otherwise. It must have broken his heart to realize the truth about Richard. We need to go through every account, every contract, I said, determination replacing my shock. I need to understand exactly what we're facing before tomorrow's meeting. Maria. And I spent the rest of the day and most of the night poring over the documents from the safe, along with additional files she had brought from her office. The picture that emerged was grim, but not hopeless. Davis Furniture Manufacturing was in serious trouble, but with immediate intervention, it could be saved. By dawn, I had the beginnings of a plan. It would require difficult decisions, significant changes, and the cooperation of people who might still view me as the disloyal granddaughter who had abandoned the family business. But it was the only way forward if the company was to survive. I showered and changed into a tailored navy suit, pairing it with a simple white blouse and my grandmother's pearl earrings, a subtle reminder of my Davis heritage. With my portfolio, containing both the evidence of Richard's misconduct and my preliminary recovery plan, I headed to the Riverview Office Park, where Davis Furniture's headquarters had been located since the 1970s. The receptionist did a double-take when I walked. Through the doors. Miss Davis, we weren't expecting. It's all right, Angela. I smiled, remembering her name from my years working there. I'm here for the board meeting. Of course, she stammered. They're gathering in the main conference room. Mr. Richard isn't in yet. He's still recovering at home. I nodded. Thank you. As I walked through the familiar corridors, I noticed how tired everything looked. The once gleaming showroom displays were dusty, the carpet worn in places, the paint faded. Even the signature Davis grandfather clock in the lobby, handcrafted by my great-grandfather himself, had stopped ticking. It was a fitting metaphor for the state of the company. Employees stopped and stared as I passed. Some nodded respectfully, others quickly averted their eyes. I recognized most of them, though there were many new faces as well. I wondered how many of the master craftspeople I had trained alongside were still with the company. The boardroom fell silent when I entered. 8 people sat around the massive oak table that had been in that room since before I was born. I recognized all of them. The Davis Furniture Manufacturing Board of Directors, most of whom had known me since childhood. Thomas Wright was already there, standing at the head of the table with a stack of folders. Alexandra, Harold Winters, the longest-serving board member, stood to greet me. Thomas has informed us of the situation. We're deeply sorry about your grandfather. Thank you, Harold, I said, taking the seat that Thomas indicated, the chair at the head of the table that had been my grandfather's and, briefly, Richard's. Before we begin, Thomas said, I should inform you that Richard Davis has tendered his resignation as CEO, effective immediately, citing health concerns. His doctor has apparently advised against additional stress while he recovers. A convenient exit, I thought. More likely, Richard knew what the forensic accountants had uncovered and was trying to distance himself from the inevitable fallout. The board has received the report from the forensic accounting team, Thomas continued, distributing folders to each member. What they found confirms William Davis's suspicions and warrants potential legal action. For the next 30 minutes, the boardroom was silent except for the occasional gasp or murmur as the directors read through the detailed analysis of Richard's financial misconduct. I had already seen most of it, but even so, seeing it laid out in such clinical detail was sobering. When they finished reading, Harold Winters removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. I've known William Davis for 40 years. I've served on this board for 27. I never thought I'd see the day when the Davis name would be associated with this kind of deception? The question now, said Eleanor Blackwood, the only female board member besides me, is where do we go from here? These reports suggest we're barely solvent. The bank could call our loans at any moment. All eyes turned to me. This was the moment my grandfather had prepared me for, though neither of us could have anticipated just how dire the circumstances would be. I have a plan, I said, opening my portfolio. It won't be easy, and it will require significant changes, but I believe we can not only save Davis Furniture Manufacturing, but position it for sustainable growth into the future. For the next hour, I outlined my vision. A hybrid approach that honored our traditional craftsmanship while embracing sustainable materials and modern designs. A phased restructuring that would streamline operations without mass layoffs. A partnership with Evergreen Design that would bring my eco-friendly innovations into the Davis product line while maintaining separate brand identities for different market segments. The first priority is stabilizing our financial situation, I explained. I propose selling the executive retreat property in Aspen. Your grandfather loved that property, Harold interrupted. My grandfather loved this company and its people more, I countered. The Aspen property costs us nearly $500,000 annually in maintenance and taxes, and it's used perhaps 3 weeks out of the year. Selling it will generate immediate capital and eliminate an unnecessary expense. Reluctantly, Harold nodded. Next, we need to address the quality issues before we lose more clients. I want to bring back some of the master craftspeople who left, create a mentorship program to train newer employees properly, and temporarily reduce our product line to focus on what we do best. What about the Chinese manufacturing deal? Asked George Patterson, our production director. Richard assured us it was the only way to remain competitive. That deal would have destroyed everything that makes Davis Furniture special, I said firmly. We can't compete with mass-produced furniture on price alone. Our value has always been in our craftsmanship, materials, and design. We need to reclaim that identity, not abandon it. The discussion continued, with questions, concerns, and occasionally, skepticism. But as the meeting progressed, I could see a shift in the room. These were people who had devoted their careers to Davis Furniture. They had been misled by Richard, but their commitment to the company remained. There's one more critical component to this plan, I said, reaching the most difficult part. The pension fund. The room tensed visibly. The forensic report confirms that approximately $2.4 million has been diverted from the employee pension fund over the past 4 years. As the new CEO and majority shareholder, I intend to personally guarantee the full restoration of those funds, even if it means liquidating some of my own assets. A murmur of surprise rippled through the boardroom. Alexandra, Thomas cautioned, that's a significant personal financial commitment. It's non-negotiable, I said firmly. These employees trusted the Davis family with their futures. I won't let my uncle's actions destroy that trust permanently. By the end of the 4-hour meeting, the board had unanimously approved my appointment as CEO and given preliminary approval to my recovery plan. As they filed out, each director stopped to shake my hand or offer words of encouragement. The atmosphere had shifted from despair to cautious optimism. Thomas stayed behind, gathering his papers. Your grandfather would be proud, he said. Not many would take on this kind of challenge, especially after the way Richard treated you. I'm not doing it for Richard, I replied. I'm doing it for the 3 generations before me who built something worth saving, and for the employees who deserve better than what they've gotten these past few years. Thomas nodded approvingly. William said you had the Davis backbone. I think he underestimated you. As I prepared to leave the boardroom, my phone buzzed with a text from Maria. Factory floor is waiting for you. Word has spread. They need to hear from you directly. I took a deep breath. The board meeting had been challenging, but addressing the employees, the people whose livelihoods depended on the decisions I would make, would be the true test of my leadership. The Davis Furniture Manufacturing Facility occupied a sprawling complex about 15 minutes from the main office. As I drove there, I thought about how much had changed since I'd last walked through those doors 3 years ago. The day I left, convinced that Richard had turned my grandfather against me, had been one of the most painful of my life. Now I was returning as CEO, tasked with saving the company I had reluctantly abandoned. When I pulled into the parking lot, I was surprised to see dozens of employees gathered outside the main entrance. My heart sank, fearing they were protesting my appointment. But as I stepped out of my car, a spontaneous round of applause broke out. Maria emerged from the crowd, beaming. "I told you they've been waiting." Overwhelmed, I approached the gathering. Faces I recognized from years of working alongside them smiled back at me. There was Carl, who had taught me how to operate the lathe when I was just 16. Rosa, whose upholstery work was legendary among our high-end clients. Miguel, a finishing expert whose techniques had been passed down through 3 generations of his family. "Thank you all for this welcome," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I know these past few years haven't been easy." "That's putting it mildly," someone called out, generating nervous laughter. "I won't make promises I can't keep," I continued. "The company is in trouble. Recovering will require hard work and some difficult changes. But what I can promise is this: Davis Furniture Manufacturing will remain true to the values my great-grandfather established: quality craftsmanship, respect, for our employees and products we can all be proud of." Maria led me through the facility, and my heart ached at what I saw. Equipment poorly maintained, inventory haphazardly organized, half-finished pieces abandoned on workbenches. The pride that had once permeated this space had been systematically crushed under Richard's management. In the main work area, all production had stopped as employees gathered to hear me speak. I could see the mixture of hope and wariness in their eyes. They had been disappointed too many times to trust easily again. "I know many of you remember me from when I worked here," I began. "Others may only know me as the founder of Evergreen Design, a company some might consider a competitor. But today, I'm here as a Davis, the great-granddaughter of Elijah Davis, who built this company from a single workbench in his garage." I moved through the crowd, making eye contact, connecting with these people whose skill and dedication had built our reputation. "I've just come from a board meeting where I was officially appointed CEO. My first act was to authorize an immediate audit of the pension fund and a guarantee that any shortfalls will be restored in full." This announcement generated murmurs of relief and approval. My second act was to cancel the overseas manufacturing plan that would have moved your jobs to China. The tension in the room visibly dissipated, replaced by cautious optimism. "But I need to be honest with you about our situation," I continued. "Years of mismanagement have left us in a precarious financial position. Some of our most loyal clients are threatening to leave due to quality issues. We have loans coming due that we currently cannot repay." I paused, letting the reality sink in. Saving this company will require changes. Some of them will be difficult. I'll be asking more of you than Richard did, but I'll also be giving you the resources and respect you deserve. The Davis Furniture. I remember valued craftsmanship over shortcuts, quality over quantity, and people over profits. That's the company I intend to rebuild. For the next hour, I walked the factory floor, listening more than talking. I heard stories of reduced materials budgets that made quality work impossible, of experienced craftspeople whose concerns were dismissed, of a culture of fear that had replaced the family atmosphere the company was once known for. By the end of the day, I had filled a notebook with observations and ideas. The challenges were even more significant than I had initially thought, but so was the opportunity. Beneath the neglect and mismanagement, the bones of a great company remained. Skilled workers who still cared deeply about their craft, equipment that could be restored, and a brand name that still carried weight in the industry despite Richard's best efforts to devalue it. As I was preparing to leave, Carl, the master woodworker who had taught me so much, approached with a small wooden box. "I made this for your grandfather's birthday last year," he said, placing it in my hands. "Richard said he was too ill for visitors, so I never got to give it to him." The box was exquisite, figured maple with walnut inlays, the Davis Furniture logo subtly incorporated into the design, the joinery flawless. "It's beautiful, Carl," I said, running my fingers over the smooth finish. I wanted him to see that. Some of us were still doing things the right way despite everything. Carl's voice cracked slightly. "Maybe you can keep it on your desk as a reminder of what we used to be, what we can be again." I felt tears threatening but held them back. "I will. Thank you." That night, I returned to my apartment above the bay. Evergreen Design Workshop, emotionally and physically exhausted, but more determined than ever. On my small dining table, I spread out the notes I had taken, the financial reports, and the preliminary recovery plan I had presented to the board. My phone rang. Olivia. "I went by the factory today after you left," she said without preamble. "The change in atmosphere was remarkable. People were actually talking about the future instead of updating their resumes." "It's going to be a long road back," I cautioned. "I know. That's why I'm calling." Olivia took a deep breath. "I want to help. Not in operations. We both know that's not my strength. But the William Davis Foundation you mentioned, for sustainable manufacturing practices. I've been researching environmental science programs along with my marine biology work. I could help establish the foundation's goals, research grant opportunities, build relationships with conservation organizations." I smiled, recalling how passionate Olivia had always been about environmental causes, a passion Richard had dismissed as impractical idealism, much as he had dismissed my interest in sustainable furniture design. "I think that's perfect," I said. "The foundation will be crucial to our long-term strategy. Davis Furniture needs to be part of the solution, not the problem." We talked for another hour, brainstorming ideas for the foundation and catching up on the 3 years we had lost to Richard's manipulations. By the time we hung up, I felt the first stirrings of real hope, not just for the company, but for healing the family rifts that Richard had created. The next morning, I arrived at Davis Furniture headquarters early. The receptionist, Angela, greeted me with a coffee prepared exactly as I liked it, a small gesture that touched me deeply. "Welcome home, Miss Alexandra," she said with a warm smile. As I settled into what had been my grandfather's office, I placed Carl's wooden box prominently on the desk. Today would be about assembling my leadership team, people I could trust to help implement the recovery plan. Richard's closest allies had already submitted their resignations, likely fearing what the forensic audit might reveal about their own complicity. Maria was my first appointment. I offered her the position of Chief Operating Officer, a role she had deserved for years but been denied due to Richard's nepotism and cronyism. "Are you sure?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "I've always been behind the scenes." "Which means you know how everything actually works," I pointed out. "You've kept this company functioning despite Richard's best efforts to run it into the ground. There's no one I trust more." For my chief financial officer, I reached out to David Chen, a former Davis Furniture controller who had left 2 years ago after clashing with Richard over accounting practices. His integrity had cost him his job, but it made him exactly the person I needed to restore financial transparency. Next came the most difficult decision. The company needed a chief design officer who could bridge the gap between traditional craftsmanship and sustainable innovation, someone who understood both the Davis legacy and the future of furniture design. After much consideration, I called Daniel Morgan, my former mentor and the previous head of design who had retired shortly after I left. At 68, he had decades of experience with traditional Davis furniture styles, but had also been supportive of my sustainable design concepts. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said, his gruff voice bringing back memories of countless hours in the design studio, learning at his side. "Heard you kicked Richard to the curb. About time. I need your help, Daniel. Just for a year or 2, until we can get back on track." He harumphed in typical fashion. "Retired life is boring anyway. My wife says if I refinish one more piece of furniture in our house, she'll divorce me." By the end of the day, I had assembled a leadership team that balanced experience with fresh perspectives. People who understood the Davis Furniture legacy, but weren't afraid to embrace necessary changes. The real work was just beginning. The next few months would be critical: renegotiating loans, rebuilding client relationships, restoring quality standards, and implementing sustainable practices. That would set us apart from competitors. That evening, as I was reviewing production schedules in my grandfather's, now my office, Thomas Wright stopped by with a small package. "Found this while organizing William's personal effects," he said, placing it on my desk. He left instructions for me to give it to you once you'd taken over as CEO. Inside the package was a leather-bound journal with the Davis Furniture logo embossed on the cover. Opening it, I recognized my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. The first entry was dated 3 years ago, shortly after I had left to start Evergreen Design. "Alexandra left today," he had written. "Richard believes he has won, but he doesn't understand that true leadership isn't about control. It's about vision. My granddaughter has it. He never will." Page after page detailed my grandfather's thoughts as he watched from afar while I built Evergreen Design. His pride when I secured my first major client. His amusement when I unknowingly outbid Richard for a batch of reclaimed lumber. His anger when he began to discover the extent of Richard's financial misconduct. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before his death. "Everything is in place. Thomas has the documents. Maria knows what to do. When the time comes, Alexandra will discover that she was never alone in this journey. The company will pass to the one who truly understands its heart. Richard believes he is taking Davis Furniture into the future. Instead, he has sealed his own fate." Tears streamed down my face as I read my grandfather's words. All this time, I had thought he had abandoned me, when in reality, he had been, supporting me from the shadows, preparing me for this moment. I closed the journal, wiping my eyes. The path ahead would not be easy. Richard had left behind a company in crisis, with damaged client relationships, demoralized employees, and serious financial problems. But I was not facing these challenges alone. I had my grandfather's legacy to guide me, a team of dedicated professionals to support me, and a clear vision for what Davis Furniture Manufacturing could become. The next morning, I arrived at the office before dawn. There was so much to do, but first, I wanted a moment of quiet reflection in the space that represented 4 generations of my family's history. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, I opened the wooden box Carl had made for my grandfather. Inside was empty space, waiting to be filled with new memories, new accomplishments, new chapters in the Davis story. I placed my grandfather's journal inside, a symbolic joining of past and future. Then I turned to my computer and began drafting a company-wide memo outlining our path forward. The first line came easily, words my grandfather had often said during difficult times. "The true measure of a Davis is not in avoiding failures, but in how we rise above them." The first month passed in a blur of 18-hour days, endless, cups of coffee, and challenges that seemed to multiply faster than we could address them. Each morning brought a new crisis: a supplier threatening to cut us off due to unpaid invoices, a customer canceling an order after years of loyalty, or another disturbing discovery about Richard's mismanagement. Yet with each problem we solved, the company grew stronger. I established regular town hall meetings with all employees, creating transparency where Richard had cultivated secrecy. Initially, there was skepticism. Too many empty promises had been made before. But as words were, backed by actions, trust began to rebuild. The pension fund restoration was my top priority. By liquidating some of my personal investments and redirecting the proceeds from selling the Aspen property, we managed to restore the full $2.4 million Richard had diverted. When I announced this at a company meeting, the room erupted in applause. Many of the older craftspeople had feared for their retirements. Now they could focus on their work again without that cloud hanging over them. Quality control became our next focus. Daniel Morgan, coming out of retirement to serve as chief design officer, implemented a comprehensive review of our production processes. We discovered that Richard had been substituting inferior materials throughout the production line, cheaper veneers instead of solid wood, synthetic glues that broke down quickly, mass-produced hardware instead of the custom fittings we were known for. It's no wonder returns are up, Daniel growled during one particularly frustrating inspection. I wouldn't put this in a college dorm room, let alone someone's forever home. We made the difficult decision to recall several recently shipped furniture collections that didn't meet our standards. A move that strained our already precarious finances, but sent a clear message to our customers. The real Davis furniture was back, and quality once again came first. David Chen, our new CFO, spent his days untangling the financial web Richard had woven. He was borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, then borrowing from Mary to pay Peter, David explained one evening as we reviewed the latest financial projections. The company has been technically insolvent for at least 8 months. How did he keep the banks from calling the loans? I asked. Personal relationships mainly. Plus, he was constantly shifting assets around to make the books look better than they were. But we were weeks away from collapse when you took over. The stark reality of our situation meant difficult decisions. We suspended all executive bonuses, including my own. We sold the corporate jets Richard had leased. We renegotiated contracts with suppliers, often leveraging my connections from Evergreen Design to secure better terms. Every dollar saved went back into the business, upgrading essential equipment, rehiring skilled craftspeople Richard had let go, and restoring the apprenticeship program that had been a hallmark of Davis Furniture for generations. Maria proved invaluable as COO, her institutional knowledge helping us navigate the complex operational changes needed. She knew which processes could be streamlined without sacrificing quality, and which suppliers could be trusted to deliver materials that met our standards. 6 weeks into our turnaround effort, I received a call from James Peterson, Richard's former business partner. He had resigned the day after the will reading, disappearing without even clearing out his office. "I'd like to meet," he said, his tone subdued. "There are things you should know." We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop downtown, away from both Davis Furniture headquarters and Evergreen Design. James arrived looking nothing like the confident executive I remembered. His designer suit had been replaced by casual clothes, his formerly immaculate appearance now slightly disheveled. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said, fidgeting, with his coffee cup. "I've been struggling with whether to come forward." "Forward about what exactly?" James took a deep breath. "Richard's plans didn't end when you took over. There's more you don't know." For the next hour, James detailed the extent of Richard's schemes, plans that went beyond financial mismanagement into deliberate sabotage. Richard had apparently never believed my grandfather would actually disinherit him. The Chinese manufacturing deal had been just the beginning of a plan to strip Davis Furniture of its assets, saddle it with debt, then sell off the brand name to overseas investors. "He called it harvesting the business," James said, unable to meet my eyes. "Taking everything of value and discarding the rest." "And you went along with this?" I couldn't keep the disgust from my voice. "I'm not proud of it," he admitted, but Richard was persuasive. He made it sound like the company was dying anyway, that we were just being pragmatic. Then James revealed the bombshell. Richard had been secretly meeting with our largest competitor, Westmore Furnishings, planning to sell them proprietary design information and client lists in exchange for an executive position after Davis Furniture's inevitable collapse. "I have proof," James said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "Emails, meeting recordings, the draft agreement with Westmore. It's all there." "Why are you giving me this now?" James stared into his coffee. "My father worked for Davis Furniture for 30 years. He still tells stories about how William Davis personally helped pay for my college education when Dad got sick. I've been lying to myself about what we were doing, and I can't do it anymore." I pocketed the flash drive, my mind racing with the implications. What is Richard doing now? Is he still meeting with Westmore? As far as I know, yes. His health issues were just a convenient excuse to step back while still working behind the scenes. The Westmore deal was supposed to happen after the company declared bankruptcy, which he assumed would be inevitable even with you in charge. This information changed everything. We weren't just fighting against past mismanagement. We were racing against active sabotage. I thanked James for the information, though I made no promises about how it would affect any potential legal action against him. His cooperation would be noted, but his complicity couldn't be entirely overlooked. Back at Davis headquarters, I convened an emergency meeting with Thomas Wright and my leadership team. The flash drive contained everything James had promised, detailed evidence of corporate espionage and planned betrayal that shocked even Thomas, who thought he had seen the full extent of Richard's corruption. "This changes our legal strategy," Thomas said grimly. "We now have grounds for an immediate injunction against Richard, preventing him from contacting any Davis clients, suppliers, or competitors." "And Westmore Furnishings?" Maria asked. "We'll need to address this directly with their board," I said. "I doubt their shareholders would approve of acquiring trade secrets and client information through corporate espionage." By the end of the day, our legal team had filed for an emergency injunction, which was granted within hours given the clear evidence. Richard was legally barred from any further interference with Davis Furniture, its clients, or its intellectual property. The confrontation with Westmore came the following week. Rather than a legal battle that would drain resources we couldn't spare, I proposed a different solution: a limited, transparent partnership focused on sustainability initiatives. They had manufacturing capacity we needed. We had design expertise they coveted. Instead of becoming adversaries or having them benefit from stolen information, we could create a mutually beneficial relationship. To my surprise, once Westmore's CEO understood how close they had come to being implicated in corporate espionage, he was quite receptive to the partnership idea. Within a month, we had established a joint sustainable materials research program that would benefit both companies while preserving our separate identities and competitive positions. Meanwhile, the integration between Davis Furniture and Evergreen design was progressing better than I had dared hope. My small team from Evergreen brought fresh perspectives and innovative techniques that complemented the traditional craftsmanship of the Davis master woodworkers. Together, they were creating pieces that honored our heritage while embracing modern sustainability. The new Heritage Green collection, traditional Davis designs updated with sustainable materials and manufacturing processes, garnered attention throughout the industry. Orders began to increase, slowly at first, then more steadily as word spread about the company's renewal. Yet significant challenges remained. Our cash flow was still precarious, with loan payments coming due faster than our recovering sales could support. And while the immediate threat from Richard had been neutralized, the damage he had done to client relationships and company morale couldn't be undone overnight. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I arrived at headquarters to find Eleanor Blackwood, our most skeptical board member, waiting in my office. "The board is concerned," she said without preamble. "Your quarterly projections show we won't be profitable for at least another 6 months. Some members are questioning whether your recovery plan is working." I had expected this. Despite the visible improvements, the financial metrics couldn't yet show the full picture of our progress. The easy path would have been to continue Richard's approach, cut quality, exploit workers, and squeeze out a few more quarters of artificial profitability before the company collapsed entirely. I said, "The rebuilding we're doing takes time, but it creates a sustainable future rather than a profitable demise." Eleanor's expression remained impassive. "Noble sentiments, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills. We've had 3 different banks decline to extend our credit lines this month alone, which is why I've been pursuing alternative financing," I replied, handing her a folder. "This is a proposal from Green Future Fund, a venture capital group that specializes in environmentally responsible manufacturing. They're interested in providing the bridge financing we need, with terms far more favorable than traditional banks." Eleanor raised an eyebrow as she reviewed the documents. "And what do they want in return? Venture capital doesn't come without strings." "A commitment to sustainable practices and a seat on the board," I said. "No controlling interest, no interference with day-to-day operations." "You found this through your evergreen connections?" I nodded. "One of our sustainable material suppliers introduced us. They've financed several similar manufacturing turnarounds." After a lengthy discussion about the details, Eleanor seemed cautiously satisfied. "I'll present this to the board. It's unorthodox, but so is everything about this situation." She paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Alexandra, I was wrong about you. When William first told me about his plan to prepare you for leadership, I thought he was being sentimental, letting family loyalty cloud his judgment. But you've proven me wrong." Coming from Eleanor, this was high praise indeed. As she left, I felt a small weight lift from my shoulders. The board's support was critical for our long-term plans, particularly as we approached the unveiling of our most ambitious initiative yet. The William Davis Foundation for Sustainable Manufacturing was taking shape under Olivia's passionate direction. She had thrown herself into the project with the same enthusiasm she once reserved for marine biology, researching best practices, recruiting industry experts for the advisory board, and establishing partnerships with environmental organizations. "We need to make this more than just a corporate PR initiative," she insisted during one of our planning sessions. "It has to create real change in the industry." I agreed completely. The foundation would provide grants to small furniture makers transitioning to sustainable practices, fund research into eco-friendly materials, and establish apprenticeship programs focused on combining traditional craftsmanship with modern sustainability. It would be Grandpa William's legacy, a way of extending the Davis commitment to quality into a commitment to environmental responsibility. The foundation's launch was scheduled to coincide with the Portland Furniture Expo, where Davis Furniture would be unveiling our new collections for the first time since the leadership change. It would be a very public test of our renewal strategy, and a chance to definitively reclaim the Davis name from the shadow Richard had cast over it. As the expo approached, activity at both the factory and headquarters reached a fever pitch. The prototype pieces for the new collections had to be perfect. The booth design had to reflect our dual commitment to tradition and innovation, and the foundation materials needed to clearly communicate our vision for the future. The night before the expo, I walked through the quiet factory, reviewing each piece that would represent Davis furniture to the world. The Heritage Green collection stood alongside our traditional lines and the most innovative designs from Evergreen. Together, they told the story of where we had been and where we were going. Carl, the master woodworker, joined me as I examined a particularly beautiful dining table that combined traditional joinery with sustainable bamboo and reclaimed oak. "What do you think?" I asked, running my hand along the satiny finish. "I think your great-grandfather would recognize his company again," Carl said simply, "and that's the highest praise I can give." The Portland Furniture Expo opened at 9 a.m. sharp. By 8:30, a small crowd had already gathered outside the Davis Furniture booth, curious about the rumors of the company's transformation. I stood with my team, ready to demonstrate that those rumors were not only true, but understated. The response exceeded our most optimistic projections. Retailers who had been reducing their Davis orders for years were now placing new ones. Interior designers crowded around our sustainable collections, asking detailed questions about materials and manufacturing processes. Industry press took photographs and requested interviews about the company's turnaround. But the most satisfying moment came midway through the second day, when I spotted a familiar figure studying our newest rocking chair design. Samuel McCormick, CEO of McCormick Hotels, our largest and most dissatisfied client. "Mr. McCormick," I greeted him, extending my hand. "I'm glad you could make it." "Alexandra Davis," he nodded, shaking my hand firmly. "I almost didn't come. The last 3 shipments we received from Davis under your uncle's management were disappointing, to put it mildly." "I know. That's why we recalled them and offered full refunds or replacements." "Which is the only reason I'm here," he admitted, running his hand along the arm of the rocking chair. "This is different from your usual style." I smiled. "It should look familiar. It's an evolution of the design I originally proposed for the McCormick collection." His eyes widened slightly. "That was you?" Richard claimed. "I'm sure he did," I interrupted gently. "But yes, that was my design, submitted anonymously after I heard you were considering dropping Davis as a supplier." Samuel studied me with new interest. "Why would you help a company you'd left behind? One led by a man who was taking credit. For your work? Because Davis Furniture is more than one man. It's generations of craftspeople, a legacy of quality, and a name my family built. I couldn't let that die, even when I thought I had no place in its future." He nodded slowly, seeming to come to a decision. "We're renovating 6 properties this year, with 8 more planned for next year. I'd like to discuss having Davis Furniture provide pieces for the public spaces and presidential suites." By the time the expo ended, we had secured enough new orders to ensure our financial stability through the critical next quarter. More importantly, we had reestablished Davis Furniture as an industry leader, now with the added distinction of being at the forefront of sustainable manufacturing. The William Davis Foundation launch, held on the final evening of the expo, attracted environmental advocates, industry representatives, and media from across the country. Olivia proved to be a natural spokesperson, articulating our vision with clarity and passion that even impressed Eleanor Blackwood. "Your cousin has found her calling," Eleanor commented as we watched Olivia field questions from a group of journalists. "Richard did her a disservice by forcing her into operations when her talents clearly lie elsewhere." "He did a lot of people a disservice," I replied, "but we're fixing that, one day at a time." As the foundation event wound down, I found a quiet moment to call Maria, who had stayed behind to manage the factory while the rest of the leadership team attended the expo. "How are things there?" I asked. "Better than expected," she replied. "That venture capital financing came through. The funds were wired this morning, and you'll never guess who stopped by today." "Who?" "Richard's wife, Elizabeth. She wanted to talk to you, but settled for leaving a message with me." I hadn't spoken to my aunt since the will reading. She had supported Richard throughout his schemes. Whether out of loyalty or ignorance, I wasn't sure. "What did she want?" "To apologize, apparently. She said she had no idea what Richard was doing with the company, that she's filing for divorce, and that she hopes someday you can rebuild a relationship with her." I wasn't sure how to feel about this unexpected olive branch. Elizabeth had been cold to me for years, reinforcing Richard's narrative that I had abandoned the family business out of selfish ambition. Did she say anything else? "Just that she's found some documents in Richard's home office that might interest you. Financial records, correspondence with overseas manufacturers, that sort of thing." This was potentially significant. Despite the evidence we had already gathered, there were still gaps in our understanding of the full extent of Richard's schemes. "Tell her I'll meet with her when I get back," I decided. "And Maria? Thank you for everything these past months. None of this would have been possible without you. After hanging up, I rejoined the foundation event, my mind still processing this new development with Elizabeth. The evening concluded with Olivia announcing the foundation's first initiative, a scholarship program for young designers focusing on sustainable furniture, named in honor of my grandfather. As we packed up the booth the following day, preparing to ship the display pieces back to Portland, I received an unexpected visit from Harold Winters, the board member who had been most visibly conflicted about my leadership. "I owe you an apology, Alexandra," he said, helping me wrap a delicate chair in protective blankets. "I was one of the skeptics when your grandfather first suggested you might be the future of Davis Furniture. I thought Richard's traditional approach was what the company needed." "It was a reasonable position," I said, securing the wrapping with tape. "On paper, Richard's experience made him the logical choice." Harold shook his head. "Experience without vision is just repetition. Your grandfather understood that. He saw in you what many of us missed, a leader who could honor our traditions while embracing necessary change." His words reminded me of the entry in my grandfather's journal. "True leadership isn't about control, it's about vision." "I appreciate that, Harold. But this turnaround isn't my achievement alone. It's the work of everyone who believed Davis Furniture was worth saving." He nodded, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "William said you'd say something like that. He also said it would be true, but incomplete. A company reflects its leadership, Alexandra. The culture you're rebuilding, the values you're reinstating, those come from the top." When I returned to Portland the following day, I found the factory humming with activity. New orders from the expo had energized the production teams, and the quality control measures Daniel had implemented were now functioning smoothly. For the first time since taking over, I felt like we were moving forward rather than just plugging holes in a sinking ship. I had arranged to meet Elizabeth at a neutral location, a small restaurant near the riverfront. I arrived early, securing a private table in the corner where we could speak without being overheard. When she entered, I was struck by how much she had aged in the months since the will reading. The carefully maintained facade had crumbled, revealing the stress she had been under. "Alexandra," she greeted me, her voice subdued. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. Maria said you had some documents that might be relevant to the company." Elizabeth nodded, placing a thick manila envelope on the table. "These were in Richard's home safe. I found them when I was..." She hesitated, preparing to leave. I opened the envelope cautiously. Inside were bank statements for accounts I had never seen before, correspondence with manufacturers in not just China, but Vietnam and Bangladesh, and most disturbingly, evidence that Richard had been diverting Davis Furniture intellectual property to shadow companies for years. "Did you know about any of this?" I asked, trying to keep accusation from my tone. "Not until recently," Elizabeth admitted. "Richard compartmentalized everything. I knew the company was having difficulties, but he always said it was temporary, that his plans would turn things around." She looked down at her hands. "I should have asked more questions, should have noticed when the stories didn't add up." I studied my aunt's face, looking for signs of deception. I saw only exhaustion and regret. "Why are you giving me these now?" "Because it's the right thing to do," she said simply. "And because I want you to know that not everyone in the family supported what Richard was doing, even if we were too blind or too cowardly to stop him." Our conversation continued through lunch. Elizabeth shared details about Richard's activities that filled in crucial gaps in our understanding. He had apparently been planning the company's deliberate downturn for over 5 years, gradually positioning himself to extract maximum personal profit from its eventual failure. "The irony," Elizabeth said as we were finishing our meal, "is that he genuinely believed he was being clever. He never saw that what he was destroying was worth far more than what he could steal from it." I thought about my grandfather's journal, about the careful plans he had made to preserve the company's future, even as Richard schemed to dismantle it. Two very different visions for the same legacy. "What will you do now?" I asked Elizabeth. "Start over," she said with quiet determination. "Somewhere new, away from all this. I've enabled Richard for too long, made excuses for his behavior. It's time I found out who I am without him." I nodded, understanding the appeal of a fresh start. "If you need anything, you've done more than enough," she interrupted, a hint of her old pride showing through. "The fact that you were even willing to meet with me after everything that happened, it means a lot." We parted with an awkward hug, the first physical contact between us in years. As I watched her walk away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: compassion for her situation, lingering anger over her complicity, but mostly relief that this chapter of the family drama was closing. The documents Elizabeth provided proved invaluable to our legal team. They established a clear pattern of deliberate corporate sabotage and theft of intellectual property that strengthened our case against Richard. More importantly for the company's future, they helped us identify and reclaim designs and technologies that had been inappropriately transferred to other entities. During the following weeks, the turnaround gathered momentum. The Green Future Fund financing allowed us to modernize key production equipment while maintaining our commitment to traditional craftsmanship where it mattered most. Orders continued to increase, particularly for our sustainable collections, which were attracting a younger demographic than Davis Furniture had typically served. One unexpected development came from the partnership with Westmore Furnishings. What had begun as a strategic move to neutralize a competitive threat evolved into a genuinely productive collaboration. Our joint research into sustainable materials yielded innovations that benefited both companies, and the shared manufacturing capacity helped us fulfill the surge in orders following the expo. 3 months after taking control of Davis Furniture, I finally felt confident enough in our progress to address the elephant in the room: the future relationship between Davis and Evergreen Design. While the initial integration had been successful, we needed a long-term structure that would preserve the unique identity of each brand while maximizing their complementary strengths. After consultations with both teams, we established Evergreen as a division of Davis Furniture rather than a separate entity. It would maintain its own design studio and brand identity, but benefit from Davis's production capabilities and distribution network. Meanwhile, Davis would incorporate Evergreen's sustainable approaches throughout its operations, creating a synergy that strengthened both brands. The transformation was far from complete, but the foundation had been laid for a company that honored its heritage while embracing the future, exactly what my grandfather had envisioned when he set his plan in motion years ago. As summer turned to fall, I finally felt secure enough to address a personal matter I had been postponing. The small apartment above my Evergreen workshop had served me well during the crisis phase of the turnaround, but it was time to find a more permanent home, one that reflected my commitment to both Portland and the company. I found it in a historic craftsman house not far from the Davis factory. Built in the 1920s with the kind of attention to detail that matched our furniture philosophy, it needed significant renovation but had solid bones. With the help of several Davis master craftspeople who volunteered their weekends, we restored the original woodwork, replaced damaged elements with sustainable materials, and created a space that blended historical character with modern functionality, a physical representation of the balance I was trying to achieve at Davis Furniture. Moving in coincided with another milestone: the 6-month anniversary of my taking control of the company. To mark the occasion, I hosted a dinner for my leadership, team, and key employees who had been instrumental in the turnaround. As we gathered in my newly renovated dining room, seated around a table that represented our finest contemporary craftsmanship, I took a moment to appreciate how far we had come. The company was not just surviving, but beginning to thrive again. The people around this table had made that possible, their dedication and skill breathing new life into a legacy that had nearly been destroyed. I raised my glass in a toast. To Davis Furniture, not just as it was, or even as it is, but as it will be. And to the people who make it more than just a company, but a community creating beautiful things that last. Daniel Morgan, gruff as ever but with undeniable pride, added, and to Alexandra Davis, who proved that the true measure of leadership isn't in avoiding failures, but in how we rise above them. As conversation and laughter filled the room, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From the shock of discovering my grandfather's death and Richard's betrayal to the gradual rebuilding of the company and family relationships, it had been a path of continuous challenge and unexpected reward. There would be more challenges ahead, expanding sustainably, maintaining quality while meeting increased demand, continuing to innovate while honoring traditions. But looking around at these people who had become more than colleagues, I knew we would face those challenges together, guided by the vision my grandfather had entrusted to me and the lessons learned through both failure and success. The Davis legacy would continue, not as a monument to the past, but as a living, evolving creation, just as my grandfather had intended. The Portland rain tapped gently against the windows of my office as I reviewed the quarterly financials with David Chen. The numbers confirmed what we'd been cautiously hoping for. Davis Furniture Manufacturing had officially returned to profitability, ahead of even our most optimistic projections. We're still not where we were in the company's heyday, David cautioned, ever the conservative financial mind. But considering where we started 9 months ago, this is remarkable progress. I nodded, studying the detailed breakdown of revenue streams. The Heritage Green collection was outperforming traditional lines for the first time, indicating a fundamental shift in our market position. Our sustainable manufacturing processes, once considered an expensive luxury, were now becoming a competitive advantage as environmental regulations tightened and consumer preferences evolved. What about the loan payments? I asked, turning to the liability section of the report. David allowed himself a small smile. Ahead of schedule, the last of Richard's unauthorized loans will be cleared by the end of next quarter. After that, our debt burden drops to manageable levels. And the pension fund? Fully restored and properly funded moving forward. The annual audit came back clean. This was particularly satisfying news. Restoring the pension fund had been more than a financial decision. It had been a moral commitment to the people who had dedicated their careers to Davis Furniture. Many of them had been with the company since before I was born, carrying institutional knowledge and craftsmanship techniques that couldn't be replaced. Maria knocked on the doorframe, poking her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation. On the factory floor, you should see. Something in her tone caught my attention. Problem or opportunity? Definitely the latter, she replied with an uncharacteristic smile. I followed her through the administrative offices and onto the manufacturing floor. As we entered, an unusual silence fell. Normally, the space hummed with activity, saws buzzing, hammers tapping, the background music of craftsmanship and progress. Today, the entire production team stood in a semicircle around something I couldn't yet see. Carl, our master woodworker, stepped forward. We wanted to show you something, Ms. Davis. The formal address was unusual coming from Carl, who had known me since childhood. A project we've been working on after hours. The circle parted to reveal a chair, but not just any chair. It was a perfect replica of the very first piece my great-grandfather had created when founding the company, with one remarkable difference. While the original had been crafted from traditional hardwoods, this version incorporated sustainable materials seamlessly with traditional ones, reclaimed oak alongside bamboo, natural finishes derived from plant oils rather than petroleum products. It's our way of saying thank you, Carl explained, for saving not just our jobs, but what those jobs mean. For remembering that Davis Furniture has always been about more than just making things to sell. It's about making things that matter, that last. I circled the chair, running my fingers over the immaculate joinery and perfect finish. The seamless blend of heritage design and modern materials embodied everything we had been working toward these past months. "We call it the Phoenix chair," Rosa, our head upholsterer, added, "because it rose from the ashes like the company." I fought back unexpected tears, touched beyond words by this gesture from the people who had every reason to be skeptical of another Davis family member making promises. Instead, they had embraced the vision and made it their own. "It's magnificent," I managed finally. "It belongs in our showroom. No, in the entrance lobby where everyone can see it." "We thought you might say that," Carl grinned. "So we made a matching set. This one's for you, for your home. A reminder of what we've accomplished together." It was the most meaningful gift I had ever received, a tangible symbol of the trust rebuilt, the skills preserved, and the future secured through our collective efforts. As I thanked each team member personally, I was reminded of something my grandfather had written in his journal. "The true value of Davis furniture has never been in its balance sheet, but in the hands and hearts of the people who craft each piece." Later that afternoon, as the Phoenix chair was being carefully transported to my home, I received a call from Thomas Wright. "I have news about Richard," he said without preamble. "The district attorney has offered a plea deal: corporate fraud, embezzlement, and intellectual property theft. If he accepts, he'll serve between 3 and 5 years, plus restitution." I leaned back in my office chair, absorbing this information. The legal proceedings against Richard had been ongoing for months, with new evidence continuing to surface as we dug deeper into his financial machinations. "Has he decided whether to take it?" "That's why I'm calling," Thomas replied. "He's requested a meeting with you before making his decision. He claims there are aspects of the situation you don't fully understand." My instinct was to refuse. Richard had betrayed not just me, but the entire company and my grandfather's trust. What possible explanation could mitigate that? And yet, curiosity nagged at me. Richard had been family once. Understanding his motivations, his justifications, might provide closure, or at least insight that could help prevent similar situations in the future. "When and where?" I asked finally. "Tomorrow morning at the county detention center. I'll arrange it if you're willing." "I'll be there," I decided. "But I want you present for the entire conversation." The detention center was a stark, utilitarian building on the outskirts of Portland. Security procedures were methodical and impersonal. ID verification, metal detectors, a series of locking doors that opened and closed with deliberate precision. Thomas and I were led to a private meeting room typically reserved for attorney-client conversations, a small concession to Richard's former status and the sensitive nature of our discussion. When Richard entered, I was struck by how diminished he appeared. Gone was the bespoke tailoring and commanding presence that had intimidated boardrooms and family gatherings alike. In their place was a standard-issue jumpsuit and the slumped posture of a man whose carefully constructed world had collapsed. "Alexandra," he nodded, taking the seat across from us. "Thomas, thank you for coming." "You requested this meeting," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "What did you want to discuss?" Richard's gaze flicked to Thomas, then back to me. "I wanted to explain myself. Not to excuse what happened, but to make sure you understand why it happened. I owe William that much, at least." I raised an eyebrow. "You owe my grandfather far more than an explanation, but go ahead." For the next hour, Richard laid out a narrative that was equal parts self-justification and genuine reflection. He spoke of joining the Davis family business as an ambitious young executive, marrying into the family, and gradually taking on more responsibility as my grandparents aged. He described feeling perpetually like an outsider despite his contributions. Never truly a Davis, always aware that bloodlines would ultimately matter more than performance. "When your parents died," he continued, his voice softening slightly, William changed. He had always seen them as the future of the company, with you eventually taking over. Their deaths devastated him, but also focused his attention entirely on you as the last Davis to carry on the legacy. I remembered those difficult days after the boating accident, the fog of grief, the sudden weight of expectations, the silent pivot of the entire family toward me as the sole inheritor of the Davis name. I had been running the company in all but title for years, Richard continued, making the hard decisions, modernizing operations, building relationships with major clients. Then suddenly, I was expected to step aside for a recent college graduate, with progressive ideas that threatened everything I'd built. The company existed for generations before you joined it, I pointed out. What you call progressive ideas were actually a return to the quality and craftsmanship that made Davis Furniture successful in the first place. Richard's jaw tightened. That's your perspective. I saw a naive idealist who would bankrupt the company chasing sustainability trends while our competitors focused on efficiency and profit margins. And that justified fraud, embezzlement, deliberately sabotaging quality? No, he admitted after a long pause. Those were reactions. Poor ones. When William began limiting my authority, questioning my decisions, I felt backed into a corner. The first financial adjustments were just to keep operations running the way I thought they should. Then it became something else. Theft, Thomas supplied bluntly. Richard didn't dispute the characterization. I convinced myself I was entitled to it. That after years of building the company's value, I deserved more than I was getting. Then one compromise led to another, and eventually you were stealing from employee pension funds and planning to strip the company bare. I finished for him. He flinched but nodded. By then, I had created a narrative where I was the victim, where the company had been taken from me unfairly, so anything I did was justified. His gaze met mine directly for the first time. I was wrong, Alexandra. Catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. The admission hung in the air between us. I studied my uncle's face, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but found only exhaustion and defeat. Why tell me this now? What do you want from me? Nothing I have any right to ask for, he replied. But William deserved better. From me, the employees deserved better. Even you, despite our differences, deserved better. I wanted you to hear that from me directly. As we left the detention center, I struggled to process the conversation. Richard's admissions hadn't absolved him of responsibility, but they had painted a more complex picture than the simple villain I had imagined. His actions remained inexcusable, yet I could glimpse the wounded pride and insecurity that had festered into destructive entitlement. "What will you do?" Thomas asked as we reached the parking lot. "About his plea deal?" I considered the question carefully. The company had already recovered most of the misappropriated funds through insurance claims and asset seizures. A protracted court battle would drain resources and attention better focused on rebuilding. Tell the DA we won't object to the plea arrangement, I decided. But the restitution needs to be directed primarily to the pension fund and the employees, who suffered most from his actions. And I want his cooperation in recovering any remaining intellectual property or assets we haven't yet identified. Thomas nodded. A pragmatic approach. William would approve. On the drive back to Portland, my thoughts drifted to the future. The immediate crisis had passed, the company was stable again, but what came next? Preserving a legacy was important, but not if it meant simply maintaining the status quo. Davis Furniture needed to continue evolving if it was to remain relevant for another generation. These reflections led to a decision I had been contemplating for several weeks. Upon returning to headquarters, I asked Maria to arrange a full leadership team meeting for the following morning, along with representatives from every department: design, production, sales, and administration. The conference room was packed when I arrived, with additional chairs brought in to accommodate everyone. The energy in the room reflected our recent successes, cautious optimism replacing the crisis mentality that had dominated our early months. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," I began. "We've reached an important milestone in our recovery efforts. The company is profitable again, our client relationships are strengthening, and our new sustainable lines are gaining traction in the marketplace." Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. "This is a moment to celebrate," I continued, "but also a time to look forward. The question facing us now is not just how to recover what was lost, but how to build something better, something that honors our heritage while meeting the challenges of the future." I outlined a vision for the next phase of Davis Furniture's evolution. Expanding our sustainable manufacturing practices beyond our flagship collections to encompass all product lines. Developing a comprehensive apprenticeship program to preserve traditional craftsmanship skills while incorporating modern techniques. Exploring international markets that valued quality and sustainability over mass production. "We're calling this initiative Legacy Forward," I explained. "It's a 5-year strategic plan that positions Davis Furniture as a leader in sustainable luxury furniture while preserving the craftsmanship traditions that have always defined us." For the next 2 hours, we discussed the details of the plan. With input from every level of the organization, the production team suggested modifications to our manufacturing processes that would reduce waste without compromising quality. The design department proposed collaborations with emerging sustainable materials researchers. The sales team identified untapped markets aligned with our new direction. By the time the meeting concluded, the initial concept had evolved into a comprehensive roadmap shaped by the collective wisdom and experience of the entire Davis Furniture community. It wasn't my plan anymore. It had become our plan, strengthened by diverse perspectives and shared ownership. Daniel Morgan, our chief design officer who had postponed his retirement to help with the turnaround, lingered after the others had departed. "Ambitious," he commented, reviewing the notes from our discussion, "but achievable. You've got these people believing again, in the company, in themselves, in a future worth working toward." "That's the real turnaround," I acknowledged. "The financials are important, but rebuilding trust and purpose, that's what will sustain us." Daniel nodded, then hesitated before continuing. "I've been thinking about my role going forward. My agreement was to stay on for a year to help stabilize things. That time is approaching." I had been anticipating this conversation. Daniel had already delayed his well-earned retirement once out of loyalty to the company and my grandfather's memory. "You've been instrumental in our recovery," I said sincerely. "We wouldn't be where we are without your expertise and institutional knowledge. And now you need fresh perspectives alongside that institutional knowledge," he finished for me. "I have a proposition. Instead of retiring completely, I'd like to transition to a part-time advisory role, focused on mentoring the next generation of Davis designers." It was an ideal solution, retaining Daniel's invaluable experience while creating space for new talent and ideas. We spent the next hour outlining a transition plan that would gradually shift his responsibilities to Meera Patel, a promising young designer who combined respect for traditional craftsmanship with innovative, sustainable approaches. As weeks passed, the Legacy Forward initiative gained momentum. Each department developed detailed implementation plans, setting measurable goals that aligned with our overall vision. The board unanimously approved the necessary capital investments, impressed by both the strategic direction and the inclusive process that had shaped it. One unanticipated challenge emerged from our success. As Davis Furniture's reputation for sustainable luxury grew, we began receiving acquisition offers from larger furniture conglomerates. Some were politely persistent, offering increasingly generous terms that would have been tempting had financial gain been our primary motivation. The most determined suitor was Meridian Global, an international furniture giant with a checkered environmental record but deep pockets and global distribution. Their CEO, Victor Hargrove, requested a meeting to discuss what he called a transformative partnership opportunity. After consulting with Thomas and the board, I agreed to hear their proposal, though I entered the meeting with significant skepticism. Victor arrived with an entourage of executives and a slick presentation outlining Meridian's vision for Davis Furniture as their premium sustainable brand. "We've been impressed by your turnaround," Victor said, his corporate charm polished to a high shine. "Taking a struggling traditional manufacturer and repositioning it as a sustainable luxury brand, that's exactly the kind of innovation Meridian wants to incorporate into our portfolio." "Davis Furniture isn't just a brand," I responded. "It's a philosophy of craftsmanship, a community of skilled artisans, and a family legacy spanning 4 generations." Victor nodded as if in complete understanding. "Which is precisely why we're prepared to offer such favorable terms. The Davis name and tradition would be preserved intact. You would continue as CEO of the division with complete creative control. We're simply offering the global infrastructure and capital resources to scale what you've built." The financial terms were indeed generous. A purchase price well above market value, guaranteed employment contracts for key personnel, and significant investment commitments for manufacturing expansion. On paper, it appeared to address many of our concerns. "And environmentally?" I asked. "Meridian's record on sustainability has been inconsistent at best." Victor's smile tightened slightly. "We recognize that sustainability is the future of our industry. Davis Furniture would help lead our transformation in that direction. Your practices would influence our broader operations, not the other way around." It was a compelling narrative, David influencing Goliath rather than being consumed by it. Yet something about the proposal left me uneasy. I promised to present it to the board and our leadership team for consideration, though I made no commitments. The ensuing discussions revealed divided opinions. Some board members saw the Meridian offer as a validation of our turnaround strategy and an opportunity to expand our impact. Others worried about loss of autonomy despite the contractual protections being offered. The leadership team was similarly split, with financial and sales departments generally favorable, while design and production expressed concerns. After 2 weeks of analysis and debate, I called a company-wide town hall to discuss the decision. Rather than announcing a conclusion already reached, I wanted to involve the entire Davis community in this crucial determination of our future. The auditorium was filled beyond capacity, with employees from every department gathered to participate. I presented the Meridian offer transparently, including both potential benefits and risks, then opened the floor for questions and perspectives. For nearly 3 hours, people shared thoughtful insights from their various vantage points. A veteran, craftsman questioned whether Meridian would truly value handcrafted quality when their business model was built on high-volume production. A young designer highlighted opportunities to influence sustainable practices industry-wide through Meridian's global platform. Our head of HR expressed concerns about preserving the family-like culture that distinguished Davis from corporate conglomerates. The most poignant comment came from Sophia, a third-generation upholsterer, whose grandfather had worked directly with my great-grandfather. "When I started here 30 years ago," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "Mr. William told me that Davis Furniture wasn't built to be the biggest, but to be the best. To create pieces that would become family heirlooms, not disposable commodities. Can we still be that company if we become part of something so much larger, with such different values?" As the town hall concluded, I thanked everyone for their candid input, promising to weigh all perspectives before making a final decision. That evening, I sat in my home office, surrounded by notes from the discussions, financial analyses, and the formal offer documents from Meridian. On my desk sat a small wooden box that Carl had crafted, the one he had originally made for my grandfather. I opened it and removed the journal I had placed inside, turning to my grandfather's final entry. "The company will pass to the one who truly understands its heart." What was the heart of Davis Furniture? Not profit margins or market share, but craftsmanship that survived decades, relationships spanning generations, and a commitment to creating beautiful, functional pieces that improved with age rather than deteriorating. Could that heart continue to beat within a corporate giant like Meridian, regardless of contractual protections? My decision crystallized with surprising clarity. The following morning, I called Victor Hargrove directly rather than having an assistant arrange a meeting. "I appreciate Meridian's interest and the generous offer," I told him, "but Davis Furniture will remain independent. Our path forward requires the freedom to prioritize values that don't always align with quarterly earnings expectations." Victor was professionally disappointed, but not entirely surprised. "I respect your decision, though I think you're limiting your company's potential. Our offer remains open should circumstances change." "They won't," I assured him, "but I would be interested in discussing a more limited collaboration, perhaps a joint sustainability initiative that benefits the entire industry without requiring acquisition." This alternative sparked Victor's interest, and we agreed to explore possibilities that might allow for cooperation without consolidation. It was a more challenging path than acquisition. Maintaining independence meant continuing to navigate financial constraints and competitive pressures without the safety net a corporate parent would provide. But it preserved the essence of what made Davis Furniture special. When I announced the decision to remain independent, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Even those who had seen practical advantages in the Meridian offer expressed relief that the Davis legacy would continue on its own terms. The town hall discussion had revealed a clear consensus beneath the surface differences, a shared belief that our company's value extended beyond financial metrics to encompass craftsmanship traditions, environmental commitments, and community connections that would be difficult to maintain within a corporate conglomerate. To commemorate this recommitment to independence, we launched the Legacy Collection, limited edition reproductions of iconic Davis designs from each decade of the company's history, updated with sustainable materials and manufacturing techniques. Each piece would include a small inlaid medallion bearing the signature of both the original designer and the current craftsperson who created it, a tangible connection between past and present. The collection generated substantial interest, even before production began. Museums and design institutions placed advance orders, while private collectors joined waiting lists for pieces that represented not just furniture, but living history. The commercial success was gratifying, but even more meaningful was the pride it instilled in our team, particularly the master craftspeople whose skills were showcased. As fall transitioned to winter, another significant milestone approached: the 1-year anniversary of my grandfather's passing and my subsequent assumption of leadership. The company had transformed dramatically in that time, moving from crisis to stability to renewed purpose. It seemed appropriate to mark the occasion, in a way that honored both the journey and those who had made it possible. After consultation with Maria and the leadership team, we decided to hold a combination memorial service and future vision event at the Portland Art Museum. The central exhibit would feature William Davis's personal furniture collection alongside new pieces representing our sustainable direction, creating a visual narrative of continuity and evolution. The event drew hundreds of attendees, employees and their families, clients, suppliers, industry colleagues, and community members who had supported our turnaround efforts. As people moved through the exhibit, conversations flowed naturally, between reminiscences of the past and excitement about the future. The atmosphere was celebratory rather than somber, exactly as my grandfather would have wanted. Midway through the evening, I gathered everyone for a brief ceremony. Standing beside the Phoenix chair, now given a place of honor in the exhibition, I shared reflections on the challenging year we had navigated together. A year ago, many wondered if Davis Furniture could survive, I acknowledged. The company faced financial crisis, damaged client relationships, and a fractured culture, Some suggested that traditional craftsmanship was simply incompatible with modern market realities, that we were clinging to an outdated business model in a disposable world. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the audience. Yet here we stand, not just surviving, but thriving. Not by abandoning our traditions, but by reconnecting with them while embracing new possibilities. Not by cutting corners, but by recommitting to quality. Not by exploiting people and resources, but by valuing them. I gestured toward the displays around us, where historical pieces stood alongside contemporary designs, the family resemblance, evident despite the evolution in materials and techniques. My grandfather understood something essential that his son-in-law never grasped. The true value of Davis furniture isn't measured in quarterly profits or market share, but in the integrity of our craftsmanship, the sustainability of our practices, and the community we create through our work. I unveiled a plaque that would be permanently installed in our headquarters lobby, bearing a quote from my grandfather's journal. "Quality endures, integrity endures, craftsmanship endures. Build on these foundations, and the company will endure as well." As the formal portion of the evening concluded, I found myself approached by Eleanor Blackwood, the board member who had been most skeptical of my leadership abilities when I first took control. "Your grandfather was right about you," she said, studying the Phoenix chair with appreciation. "Though I suspect even he would be surprised by how completely you've transformed the company in just 1 year." "I had help," I reminded her. "A lot of it." "True leadership isn't about doing everything yourself," Eleanor observed. "It's about bringing out the best in those around you." William knew that. I think Richard never did. Her assessment of the contrast between my grandfather's collaborative approach and Richard's controlling management style resonated deeply. The different philosophies had produced dramatically different results. One building a legacy worthy of preservation, the other nearly destroying it pursuing short-term gains. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing alone in a quiet corner of the exhibition, contemplating a rocking chair my great-grandfather had crafted nearly 70 years earlier. Its lines were simple but elegant, the joinery flawless, despite decades of use. Beside it stood a contemporary rocking chair from our Heritage Green collection that honored the original design while incorporating sustainable materials unknown when the original was created. The visual dialogue between these pieces, one representing our origins, the other our future, perfectly captured what we had been working to achieve. Not preservation for its own sake, nor change merely for the appearance of progress, but thoughtful. Evolution guided by enduring values. Carl approached, nodding appreciatively at the two chairs. "Full circle," he commented. "Your great-grandfather would be proud to see his design living on like this." "I hope so," I replied. Sometimes I wonder if we're getting the balance right, honoring tradition while embracing innovation. "That tension is what keeps us honest," Carl said, running his hand along the arm of the contemporary chair. "If we lean too far toward tradition, we stagnate. Too far toward innovation, we lose our soul. The sweet spot is finding designs and techniques that could only come from Davis furniture, both unmistakably us and unmistakably current." As guests departed and the museum staff began preparing to close, I took a final walk through the exhibition. Each piece told a story of the person who designed it, the hands that crafted it, the family that had passed it down through generations. Collectively, they narrated the larger story of Davis Furniture itself, a company built on relationships as much as woodworking skill, on values as much as valuable objects. The past year had been about saving that legacy from those who would sacrifice it for short-term gain. The challenge now was to extend it into a future that would look very different from the world my great-grandfather had known, while maintaining the essence of what he had created. Standing there, surrounded by the physical embodiment of 4 generations of craftsmanship, I felt both the weight of that responsibility and the privilege of carrying it forward. The path ahead would bring new challenges, evolving market expectations, environmental considerations, technological advancements. But the foundational principles remained unchanged: quality, integrity, craftsmanship, community. These were the values that had sustained Davis Furniture through previous transitions and would guide us through whatever came next. As long as we remained true to them, the legacy would endure, not as a static monument to the past, but as a living tradition, continuously renewed through the creativity and dedication of each generation that inherited it. 18 months after taking control of Davis Furniture, I found myself in an unexpected position, standing before a crowd of industry leaders accepting the Sustainable Business Leadership Award at the annual International Furniture Design Conference in Milan. The journey from near bankruptcy to industry recognition had been challenging, but profoundly rewarding. "This award doesn't belong to me," I said, holding the elegant glass sculpture that symbolized our achievement. "It belongs to everyone at Davis Furniture who embraced change while honoring tradition. To the craftspeople who have dedicated decades to perfecting their skills. To the designers who reimagined what sustainable luxury could mean. To the support staff who kept everything running through the darkest days of our transformation." The applause was gratifying, but even more meaningful was seeing our Heritage Green collection displayed prominently in the exhibition hall alongside the most innovative designs from around the world. Davis Furniture had reclaimed its position as an industry leader, not by chasing trends but by setting them, proving that environmental responsibility and traditional craftsmanship could coexist profitably. After the ceremony, I was approached by several young designers eager to discuss potential collaborations. Their enthusiasm for combining traditional woodworking techniques with cutting-edge sustainable materials mirrored the philosophy we had been developing, suggesting we were indeed at the forefront of an industry-wide shift. "Your grandfather would be astonished by all this," remarked Daniel Morgan, who had accompanied me to Milan despite his semi-retirement. Not the success. He always believed in the company's potential, but the international recognition for sustainability. In his day, that wasn't even part of the conversation. He adapted to changing times throughout his career, I reminded Daniel. That's why Davis Furniture survived when so many other traditional manufacturers didn't. We're just continuing that tradition of thoughtful evolution. Back in Portland, the momentum continued to build. The William Davis Foundation had grown beyond our initial expectations, funding research into sustainable forestry practices and establishing scholarship programs for young craftspeople interested in traditional woodworking. Olivia had proven herself an exceptional director, bringing scientific rigor to the Foundation's environmental initiatives while honoring the craft traditions at the heart of our business. As spring turned to summer, an unexpected opportunity arose that would test our commitment to our values in a very public way. The governor's office contacted us about a special commission, completely refurnishing the historic state capitol building, using sustainable materials and manufacturing processes. It would be the largest single contract in Davis Furniture's history, with significant visibility and political implications. The prestige and financial benefits were undeniable, but so were the challenges. The project timeline was aggressive, the technical specifications demanding, and the public scrutiny would be intense. Every piece would need to meet both historical accuracy requirements and modern sustainability standards, a combination that had never been attempted at this scale. After hours of thoughtful discussion with our leadership team, we reached a consensus. We would submit a proposal, but on our terms. Rather than simply accepting the state's specifications, we would propose modifications that would better align the project with both sustainability goals and our production capabilities. We would also insist on a more realistic timeline that wouldn't compromise quality or burn out our team. When we finally presented our proposal to the governor's committee, their response was overwhelmingly positive. They approved our adjusted timeline and accepted most of our suggested modifications, recognizing the value of our expertise. The contract was signed the following week, with work to begin immediately. As we ramped up production for the capital, project, I received an unexpected invitation. Richard had requested another meeting. He had been serving his sentence for nearly a year now, maintaining minimal contact with anyone from his former life, according to Elizabeth, who occasionally updated me on his situation. He says he has information that might be relevant to the company, Thomas Wright explained when conveying the request. Something he didn't disclose during the previous investigations. Curiosity outweighed reluctance, and I once again found myself in the visiting room of the detention center. Richard looked markedly different from our last meeting. Not just physically thinner, but somehow lighter in spirit. The desperate defensiveness replaced by a quiet resignation. "Thank you for coming," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I wasn't sure you would. Thomas said you have information about the company." Richard nodded. "About its history, specifically. Something I discovered years ago but kept to myself, thinking it might be useful leverage. Now, I just think it belongs with the rightful owner of the company." He explained that during renovations of the old Davis workshop, the original building where my great-grandfather had started the business, he had discovered a hidden compartment containing a collection of journals, design sketches, and correspondence dating back to the company's founding. "I kept them in a safe deposit box," Richard admitted. "I've arranged for Elizabeth to retrieve them and give them to you. They document your great-grandfather's entire creative process, including designs that were never produced. I thought they might be meaningful for the company archives, especially given your commitment to honoring its heritage." The historical documents proved even more significant than Richard had indicated. Beyond my great-grandfather's journals and correspondence, the collection included design sketches for an entire furniture collection that had never been produced, pieces that combined classical craftsmanship with surprisingly modern aesthetics, as if he had been decades ahead of his time but hesitant to push the market too far. As we digitized and cataloged the collection, a plan began to form. We would create a special Founders Collection based on these never-produced designs, updated with sustainable materials but faithful to the original vision. It would be a limited edition, with each piece numbered and accompanied by documentation about its history and design intent. The timing aligned perfectly with our 75th anniversary celebrations, creating a meaningful connection between our founding principles and our current direction. The Founders Collection would demonstrate in tangible form how innovation and tradition had always been intertwined in the Davis approach to furniture making. When the collection debuted at the prestigious American Design Showcase, the response exceeded our expectations. Design critics praised the seamless blend of historical and contemporary elements, while sustainability advocates highlighted our use of reclaimed woods and non-toxic finishes. Collectors placed orders for the limited edition pieces despite the premium pricing, recognizing both their aesthetic value and historical significance. As we approached the 2-year mark since taking control of the company, I found myself reflecting on the transformation we had achieved. The financial metrics told part of the story: restored profitability, growing market share, expanding client base. But the less tangible changes were equally significant. The renewed pride among our craftspeople, the strengthened relationships with suppliers and customers, the sense of purpose that permeated every aspect of our operations. This reflection led to a significant announcement at our annual company gathering, held at the recently restored Riverside warehouse. After reviewing our achievements and challenges, I unveiled a new governance structure for Davis Furniture Manufacturing. Effective immediately, we're establishing a stewardship council that will guide our strategic decisions moving forward, I explained to the assembled employees, board members, and stakeholders. The council will include representatives from design, production, sustainability, finance, and community relations, ensuring that all perspectives are considered as we navigate the future. The announcement generated surprised murmurs, particularly when I clarified that while I would chair the council, major decisions would require majority agreement rather than CEO directive. It was an unusual approach for a family-owned company, but one that reflected the collaborative spirit that had fueled our comeback. Davis Furniture isn't the achievement of a single person, I continued. It's the collective creation of everyone who has contributed their skills, insights, and dedication over 75 years. Our governance should reflect that reality. The following morning brought another significant milestone: the official opening of the first fully renovated space in the state capitol project. The governor had requested that I personally attend the ribbon-cutting ceremony, as the furniture we had created for the historic chamber had become central to the renovation's narrative. Standing in the magnificent space, watching sunlight stream through restored windows to illuminate the sustainable furniture we had crafted, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Each piece in the room represented the best of Davis Furniture, designs that honored historical traditions while incorporating environmental responsibility, crafted by artisans who took pride in creating objects meant to serve for generations. After the ceremony, as attendees admired the craftsmanship of the chamber's furnishings, I noticed an elderly man studying one of the conference tables with particular intensity. His practiced eye and careful examination of the joinery marked him as someone familiar with woodworking. Davis Furniture made the original table for this room in 1952, he commented as I approached. I was an apprentice then, just learning the trade. Worked on the drawer glides for this very design. Jackson? I asked, recognizing the name from company records. Robert Jackson? His weathered face creased in surprise. You know my name? Your work is legendary at Davis, I explained. The Jackson method for drawer construction is still taught to every apprentice. This chance encounter captured the essence of what we had been working to preserve. Not just techniques and designs, but connections between generations of craftspeople, between creators and their creations, between a company and its extended community. It reinforced my conviction that the path we had chosen, though more challenging than alternatives, honored the true legacy of Davis Furniture. The next morning, I arrived at headquarters early, drawn to my grandfather's, now my office, by a need for quiet reflection before the day's activities began. The space had evolved over the past 2 years, gradually incorporating elements that reflected both his legacy and my own perspective. His antique desk alongside my contemporary ergonomic chair, his collection of wood samples next to my sustainability research materials, his portrait watching over it all with what I like to imagine was quiet approval. On the desk sat Carl's wooden box, now containing not just my grandfather's journal, but a growing collection of company milestones and personal reflections, a continuing chronicle of the Davis legacy as it evolved under new stewardship. I opened it and added a program from the Capitol ribbon-cutting ceremony, a tangible reminder of how far we had come. My uncle had told everyone I'd failed in business at my grandfather's funeral. He had collapsed when the executor revealed who had actually saved the family company. But the true revelation had not been about success or failure in conventional terms. It had been about understanding that leadership meant stewardship, holding something valuable in trust for future generations, protecting its essence while enabling its evolution. As the office gradually filled with arriving employees, their voices creating the familiar morning rhythm of a thriving workplace, I closed the wooden box and prepared to join another day of collaborative creation. The Phoenix chair sat in the corner of my office, a reminder of where we had begun this journey of renewal. Beside it now stood a chair from the Founders Collection, representing where we were headed. Between these two pieces, one born from crisis, the other from rediscovered history, lay the continuing story of Davis Furniture Manufacturing. Not my story alone, but our collective narrative of craftsmanship, sustainability, and purpose that would continue to unfold in ways we could only partially envision. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.